Hi, my name is Julius Poncelet Manapul. My pronoun is them, they, and z. I am Filipino-Canadian. I was born in the Philippines in 1980. I immigrated to Canada in 1990. I am a contemporary artist using a lot of mediums and material from installation, sculpture, digital, paper, sculpture, performance, experimental film, sound. I find that, I guess in my practice, I learned to be nomadic with my materials and not be tied down in one materiality for my art practice. I'm a professor at the Faculty of Arts at OCAD University, teaching courses such as making gender, LGBTQ, two-spirited plus, and also courses such as in performance art, also mixed media, digital, installation, as well as a course that I written, imagining queer Asian futurity. My background was in drawing and painting, and it started to evolve later on, and I realized that, you know, the old saying, right? The medium is the actual message. Your material already has a story, a narrative, and I just couldn't find enough narrative within a painting or art supply places that come from a factory. I needed to kind of get closer to the materials I was using and be aware what kind of messages I was portraying. In a lot of my work, I really excavate the question what it is to be Filipino, to be queer, to be a migrant, who holds the power in communities and why. So a lot of my work really digs deep around the colonization in the Philippines by Spain and how to reclaim this Filipinx identity and what it is to be Filipino, but within the queer landscape as well. And also in a lot of my work really faces towards the adversity and the difficulties about, you know, essence of belonging, especially within the queer communities, and how at times there are homophobia and racism that occurs within the community itself, and trying to address those issues, simultaneously addressing regaining back cultural identity. Why do I need to assimilate in a westernized Anglo-Saxon countries to survive, to fit in? And I find a lot of diasporic bodies or migrant Filipinos. I remember when I immigrated here, 1990, my brother and my sister didn't have any Filipino accent. They really flowed in to the community very well. I had a harder time. And to me, there was this looming shame towards an accent. And if I just had the language back then, to kind of reanalyze that maybe it's just myself refusing to be completely colonized. I think it's so demystifying how much cultural erasure we kind of do unknowingly and being proud about it. So to me, it was also from materialities such as Filipino whitewashing products that I've been using in my work. I use the Tagalog language, but also the baybayin text character, which is pre-colonial, which is the text that Filipinos used before Spanish colonization. So in the work entitled Kamayan Na, which translate back home, when there's a feast or a party, it's like, you know, there's this boodle fight set on the table on banana leaves with grilled food, and I remember the smell and how visceral it is, using our hands. So this idea of kamayan na, eating with our hands, is synonymous within Filipino culture until we got colonized by Spain, introducing us the cuchara and the tinidor to eat it with it, right? So to me, it's about trying to regain back certain essence of ways of eating, or just ways of cultural practice, growing up, trying to remember it. But also, kamayan na, erasing my Tagalog. I also retranslate in baybayin text, which you will see scrolled along the tablecloth at the bottom, which also becomes filigrees, a floral motif that evokes colonial aesthetic combined with the Filipinx heritage of the language. And to me, there's this idea of Tagalog sayings that we say while we're eating. It's like, it's not a meal if there's no rice. It's just a bunch of stews, right? We always have to eat rice. So in the plates, you will see there's Tagalog text saying, "Nasa na yung kanin?" or "Wag ka nang maarte dyan." Don't be extra. There's something about the table, or can you pass the fish sauce, pakipasa yung patis. So a lot of those language are then crafted using rice, dry rice, which I then stained with Filipino soy sauce, baked in the oven for around 30 minutes in different gradation as well. So to me, my materials comes from remembering all of the objects and food and items that I grew up in as a child. So they become my material. So even before touching any of the medium that I've been using, there's already a message into it. I always think about materials, not objects, but lives. I think they carry a sense of narrative and history and message even before you touch them. And that kind of reimagining my material and the sources where I'm getting it from, and trying to kind of curate all of those objects together to create a whole narrative scene. For example, I also use queer, homonormative white bodies that amalgamates within the table setting. You would see it in the text and the floral and the paper, birds and butterflies, and also the floral motif that you see on the table itself. Also the butterflies that you see in the cloche, and also the Maya birds. And these are the birds and the butterflies are the species that are indigenous to the Philippines, and I really try to make sure that when I'm creating them and crafting them, they were rooted somewhere else. But then I use the homonormative images of the cis gay white bodies, or whitewashed or exoticized bodies that kind of create the feathers, create the patterns, create those kind of homonormative but also Eurocentric dissection within the work itself. So in my work, it's really all about transformation, change, and trying to reiterate something new to the resources and the objects that I've been working on as well. To me, when I first immigrated here, it was so difficult to kind of express myself because I was translating while I was talking. So to me, most of my work really delves around trying to regain back my own languages, trying to remember. Like I had to purchase a Filipino Tagalog English to Tagalog dictionary just to remember what I've lost. So there's this, in a lot of diasporic bodies and migrants, there's this essence of the loss of your own identity, your own culture. That to me is quite interesting because I'm sure it's not just Filipinos, it's also other individuals in other countries that learn to assimilate and then completely forget where they're coming from. I call that almost like the Pygmalion complex, because I remember returning back to the Philippines And I've been living here for so long. Returning back, I didn't felt like I kind of fit in anymore. But at the same time, I didn't feel completely belonging in Canada. So what happens is you belong into this limbo of space, kind of like, what's that, My Fair Lady character, Eliza Doolittle. It's like at the end, it's like supposed to be happy, but I see that film as something that's quite sad, because through that transformation, through that longing of transition between one space to one space, they're left into this entity where they cannot feel like they belong in both spaces anymore. And to me, there's that lingering melancholy of knowledge of that, right? Which is quite a struggle. So I realized that the only way for me to feel like there's a space for me to belong was through my art, and how my art practice can create that country, that space, that duality that I feel now unstable in both sides as well. So I collect a lot of, my materials really shifts also towards experimentation and also performative. I also have a drag persona called Rice Kaganda, which means rice, pretty. Who sometimes kind of shows up in a lot of the performative video installation that I've been doing. It's like a female repressed version of what it is to be queer, but also in drag, and it's usually very whitewashed. And it's also interesting within the drag community how in any other culture, the moment they turn into drag, they're literally, the colored contacts are in, the pale wig goes in, and how, the whitewashing process happened. And this is a lot of the main material that I also use to also evoke the erasure of language, the change of language, but also how it also represents something visual of conformity and change, right? And again, whitewashing products in Asian country is like so well known and so big and still popular nowadays, from skin whitewashing, skin toner, soaps, which you see a lot in my work, like the Likas soap, the toners, the Eskinol. These are really soaps and toners that I got accustomed to using back home in the Philippines. I remember being a kid, my mom and my parents or my aunts and titas always say, hey, don't stay out of the sun for too long. You don't want to get dark, So essentially, there's still this ideology of white valued, this kind of whitewashed valued. And I evoke that ideologies of whitewashed valued that was instilled even when I was young into also language, how we have to speak this way and make sure that there's no accent whatsoever, which I find quite daunting, because by the time I speak Tagalog, do I start to get an accent towards the other way. So to me, it's trying to find those balance and trying to show all of these issues to society, to people, even to the Filipino community, that, at times, for a change to happen, we need to be aware of what we are doing to ourselves and how colonialism still exists and trickles in to the daily mundane routine that we must uphold, this valued ideology of whiteness, of articulation of the English language. So to me, this work is almost quite melancholy and sad, like in most of my endeavor. It comes from trauma and pain, but I try to create a certain aesthetic into it. And the aesthetic that I put is how to hybridize and transform and migrate Filipino aesthetic and westernized aesthetic, or Eurocentric aesthetics, derived from, Spain. And Eurocentric Spain aesthetics really comes up a lot in my work because, again, it is the country that's mostly well known for colonizing the Philippines and how it changed the whole dynamic in that country. And also the way we eat, the kind of food that we eat. I love this idea in the table setting about this idea of eating, but eating, not only eating and consuming the words that you're speaking, the Tagalog, with the translation, but also consuming the objects as well, right? We're consuming the whitewashing product. The likas soap at the side that's supposed to lighten your skin, we're consuming that. So how much have we consumed, and how much must we regurgitate and vomit out in order to regain some consciousness of who we are before we had to assimilate for survival? So in this piece, in this installation, it's in two parts. There is the table setting, and there's also the projection. It's almost performative. It's also experimental. So the title of this piece is Kamayan Na, erasing my Tagalog. Kamayan Na, which means let's eat with our hands now. So the table setting evokes the boodle fight in a lot of the parties in the Philippines, where they have grilled food and rice that's spread on top of the banana leaf, and then we usually end up eating with our hands. So what I've done is somehow, how would a table setting be if it's amalgamated within very Eurocentric Spanish colonial table setting and mixed with the Filipino fiesta boodle fight table setting as well. I was constantly thinking about Filipinx futurity and futurism, and how in a lot of the way we create work in our practice is always about sometimes really looking back at the past and also looking forward for a better future, for some other entity that it could work out, and then we're in the present. So I'm constantly trying to create something that is pulled from the past and then trying to reimagine the future to create this hybridized ideology of a table setting in itself. And as you can see, I've disposed of the spoon and the fork, the cuchara and the tenedor, which was introduced to the Philippines through Spanish colonization. And beyond the tablescape, you would see a lot of paraphernalia of those souvenir shops that you would see in the Philippines. You will have the kalesa, the jeepney, all of those other items, but then you also have the sculptural pieces as well, with floral motifs and also old chinaware that I've appropriated, that I've used. So a lot of the materials that you're seeing, I actually used before and have consumed food in. So to me, it's so important that not a lot of my material comes from an art store. It's so important that my material came from my daily living, because it adds history. It's connected to me. It's connected to what I do as well. And then at the backdrop, you see a projection, and the projection actually has the actual plate, all 6 plates, with the Tagalog saying, with the English translation. But within this digital piece is an animation of how all of the text starts to blur together. So completely erasing the language, becoming unreadable. So it's all about, at the same time, forgetting how to speak it, forgetting how to translate it, forgetting how to understand it. And that's the emotion I wanted to kind of evoke through the animation, but also as well, you'll see my portrait with the remnants of little tiny feathers that covers my face. And the tiny feathers that covers my face were actually feathers that was used from my prior work called Whitewash Cockfight, about cockfight within the Philippines and, duel to the death. But again, those feathers are also crafted from homonormative queer male bodies. So it's about covering my face. It's also about kind of changing myself, kind of like masking myself, whitewashing myself. And then you will see the kamayan na in baybayin that drapes across. So I wanted to tie in visually the tablescape as well as the projection that becomes the backdrop, almost like a portal, another way of articulating what you're seeing on the table itself. And you can see in some of the leaves, there are cutouts of the hands, which also evokes this idea of eating with your hands. But also, hands are so expressive, right? When we're talking, I'm doing this while I'm talking. So it's another way of language, of expression, but also another way of eating, and also the idea of using your hands throughout the table when you're looking at the soap, the toners, the whitewashing products, and also the viscerality of the work itself, the painstaking of cutting, of the digital collage, the printing, and then the cutting amalgamated with real objects that I have possessed, and just really creating a landscape. I see it more as a landscape of a body, and the bodies are there. I think sometimes symbolically, but sometimes literally, the queer male cis bodies that crafted those intricate paper sculptural designs from the floral on the table all the way to the decorative baybayin kamayan na around the border of the tablecloth, all the way to the Maya bird in the cloche and the butterflies. So it really evokes this idea of consumption, the body, translation, loss of culture, or forgetting the language itself.